I'm making a VR dungeon crawler game called Into the Dungeon. It's going to have randomly generated dungeons, online multiplayer, quests that are also randomly generated alongside the dungeon, think Betrayal at House on the Hill, classes, etc. Because, hey, I'm a solo indie dev with a full-time school and work schedule, so why would I try to be reasonable with the scope of this project? In the last video, I pretty much showed how I'd gotten back to where I was in my previous attempt at creating this game. It was my first attempt at VR development, and, well, my last version of this game sucked, I would say. I can do better. In only a few weeks though, I'm further along than I ever was before, and it's looking so much better this time. I've got the beginnings of a pretty awesome VR combat system, some dope looking cell shading, and a pretty neat inventory system, all working well on the Quest 2. Everybody please pray to the VR gods that I can keep this game optimized for the Quest 2. It's worth the extra effort. So let's go over what I've done in the past week. First, the inventory system. It's pretty simple. As stated previously, the scope of my game is pretty large, so I'm using packages from the Unity Asset Store as much as possible. That might sound expensive, and it kind of is, but luckily I've been a little game design nerd since back when I was in 7th grade with a paper route. And ever since that first paycheck, I've been putting an embarrassing amount of money into collecting Unity assets since I was really young. Unfortunately, that means a lot of them are deprecated now, but hey, what can you do? All that to explain that I'm using Hurricane VR and Hexabody VR together for my game, which are amazing assets for VR development, and I 100% recommend them to anybody looking to get started. This comes with a pretty amazing inventory system that you can add to your characters, which I just adapted a little bit. Some of you might remember this godforsaken backpack model from my TikToks, which I also got from the asset store and then had to edit myself in Blender to get it working for VR. I'm a pretty dang good programmer if I do say so myself, but I am absolutely not an artist, I tell you what. Luckily, I still had the backpack model from my last game attempt, so I brought that over and got the inventory looking good again. It stays in your left shoulder slot, so you can reach behind you and grab it like you would actually be grabbing a backpack off of you. Right now, I've only got weapons as objects that can go in the big slots, but potions and stuff will go in the little slots when I make them later on. I was also sick of seeing the tiny version of it in the mirror hovering near my head, so I wrote a quick script to turn off the mesh renderer unless it was physically in your hands. I'm only now realizing that you can still see the slots, but that's a problem for future me. I also got into custom shaders. Again, with the help of a Unity asset, I got some really nice cell shaders here. Can you call this cell shading? I don't really know. Whatever, that's what I'm calling it. The outline and the toon shading thing going on now that you can see in the characters and the walls and all that. I like it a lot, and I think it makes these simplistic assets, which I'm using for quest optimization purposes, look really nice. It adds a little bit of flair to the otherwise simple artwork. This was fairly easy to implement with this asset, although I did have to learn a little bit about custom shader scripting to get it working on the customizable character, which also had a different custom shader. And by learn, I mean copy and paste together a bunch of code trying to combine the two custom shaders, getting a bunch of errors, and then deleting lines of code over and over until it finally worked, and I still have no idea why. It's like this bird. Now, for the combat. Here's our friendly little goblin. He's so cute. First step was getting some ragdoll collisions set up for the enemies. Obviously, just having a capsule collider around a character in a VR game is going to feel weird, so we needed some more realistic collisions. Luckily, there's an asset for that. Root Motion makes two amazing assets that I literally swear by. I don't know how people make games without them. Final IK and Puppet Master. I actually used Final IK to get the custom character working in VR, and now I'm using Puppet Master to get the enemy working. So with that, I got the colliders set up along the different body parts of the goblin. I used Emerald AI, another asset I swear by in all my projects that I've made, and this animation pack I have as a starting point for the enemy behavior. And even just with that, the game's already starting to feel pretty good. Where it gets tricky is adding weapons to the AI. If you know much about game development, you can already see how using the sword swinging animations like this just aren't going to work well with the physics colliders on a sword. The animation moves faster than most systems will update, so if you hit the sword on a bad frame, you'll go right through it. Usually this isn't an issue in game design. You don't actually need the sword collisions to be registered, you just need the combat animation to play, and then if the enemy is close enough to the player, do damage. But in VR, registering actual collisions is extremely important if I want this combat system to feel at all fair. I want to be able to block, parry, and dodge the enemy, and damage shouldn't be done until the sword actually hits the player colliders. The first step is slowing down the attack animations, which I did. This needed to be done anyway for non-physics related reasons, because imagine trying to block this animation in VR. There's no warning. I'm going for kind of a Souls-like feel where you can see the warning signs of the attack in time to block or move out of the way, and these fast animations just aren't realistic for that. The second step was doing a lot more code stuff than I'm going to go into here to get the weapon working as solidly as possible and recognizing all the collisions. I made an additional and optional prop muscle on the ragdoll physics that extends to the length of any potential weapon, so basically it's like I added another limb to the ragdoll system. And making it part of the overall ragdoll animation system instead of having it be its own separate physics entity seemed to work pretty well. I was happy with the result. But now you might already see the next problem. The sword is stuck as part of the enemy, and I had to complicate crap by deciding to make the enemy weapons also work as player weapons. There are two reasons that I want to do this. Number one, I want you to be able to grab the sword out of the enemy hands. I think there's something super dope about being able to sneak up behind an enemy and grab his weapon out of his hand and then beat him down with it or something. In the future, you'll be able to grab it and then stab him in the back or something cool like that, right? Number two is the AI is going to look like an idiot if they're unarmed while there's a perfectly good sword lying on the ground in front of them, and the only reason they aren't grabbing it is because it's a player sword. And vice versa, why shouldn't you as the player be able to pick up the sword of your dead enemy? It just makes sense that the weapons need to work for both player and enemy. Hypothetically, anyway. In reality, the physics and scripts attached to an enemy weapon versus a player weapon are very different. I feel like I'm already getting too boring with the details here, but just know that I'm cool, because in the end I had to modify the code of the legend Partel Lang himself, and I'm sure I'm mispronouncing his name. I tried to find the pronunciation online and I really couldn't, so I apologize, but he's the creator of Puppet Master. Add in a few scripts of my own and boom. Oh yeah, and I created shields too once I had those handheld object physics down. After that, I had to make the AI a bit smarter so that it could switch between different fighting styles depending on if it had weapons, shields, none of the above, etc. I spent hours creating my very own scriptable objects in Unity that would hold a group of animations that would then be applied manually through the Emerald AI API. It was beautiful, and then I found out that Unity apparently had these things called animator override controllers that do exactly what I had just spent all of my time creating, and that they run way smoother than my solution ever could. So that's on me for not doing my dang research first. Idiot. But hey, at least my melee AI script was still useful. So now we've got the enemies using different animations depending on its weapon and shield combination, with individual weapons determining what type of animations will be used. I know that might seem strange, like it should be that the character determines the animations and not the weapons, but I like this and I think it's a good solution so that each character can use any weapon that it finds, at least for melee characters. I'll work on mages and ranged attackers later down the line. Finally, I played around a lot trying to tweak the character so that it would actually respond to my hits and punches. Bounce around a little bit, you know. These ragdolls with their rigid bodies and joints have so many possible combinations of values, I spent way too long messing around with them trying to get the right feel. But I think it's pretty great right now. I feel like my punches actually matter. That's it for this devlog. I'm making insane amounts of progress. When I get like this, I tell my girlfriend that I'm in Joe mode from Little Women. It feels like my mind is constantly working on the game and solving coding issues that I'm having, especially when I'm in the shower and don't have a notepad or phone to write things down on. Screw you, brain. But regardless, I'm in the zone and my fingers literally can't type fast enough to implement all the code that I have floating around in my brain, which is my favorite place to be as a programmer. It was hard to take a break to make this devlog, but I read somewhere that the most common error of startups is taking too much time working on the product and not enough time marketing. And it won't be as much fun if I finish my game and nobody's around to play it, so it really means a lot to me that you've stuck around to the end of this video. Please consider supporting me by subscribing to my channel and leaving a like. Sharing it with friends who you think might be interested would mean a lot to me as well. Also, you can join the Discord and sign up to become a beta tester, and I'll leave those links in the description. Thanks again for watching, and now I'm gonna go make it so I can stab this poor sucker.